I think, as you listening to the last panel, one of the questions is what happens now without Chavez? And I think that a large part of the answer, what happens now, is Argentina. I think if you look at Argentina, which historically, I've just been spending a lot of time there, and I just did a long report on Argentina and all of these issues, which I'd be happy to give you online. It's available in both English and Spanish. If you look at the role Argentina has played in the last multiple years in drug trafficking, it's grown exponentially just because the government doesn't really care. You've had the Nestor Kirchner and then followed by Cristina. And if you looked with one of the things I started looking at the request of a particular client was the precursor chemical flows through Argentina, which was fascinating because suddenly Argentina was awash in cocaine, and it has actually the highest per capita cocaine use in the world today. Brazil is the second highest user population after the United States in the world today. So you see the impact of the drug trade largely driven by the fact that Peru and Bolivia are now producing HCl, the white powder you stick up your nose, which they had not been doing for many years when the Colombians were in control. Now flooding the markets, and a lot of it's going to West Africa, and Mike Braun and others have done a lot of work on that. But when you saw the precursors in Argentina was the ephedrine, which is used for methamphetamines. And if you looked at in 2008, the legal requirement for the Argentine pharmaceutical industry was less than 1 ton, and they were importing 28 tons. So one might think that there's something a little off in the economic rationale of that. And it turns out they were shipping most of that then on up to Mexico, but there were no import controls at all, so it wasn't actually illegal. There's several big massacres down there as the Mexican cartels moved in. It got really ugly, and they suddenly said, okay, we're going to cut this down. They put in some import controls, and it dropped a little bit, and now it's back up above 20 tons again this year. So you see the complete sort of absence of interest in controlling the precursor flows and the cocaine flows through. But I think what's most interesting, and I think that if the conversation is focused largely on Venezuela today, and I think we're in that context, Venezuela has certainly been important, but you can't ignore in the financial structure, the drug flow structure, and the Bolivarian structure in general, the roles of both Ecuador and Argentina in the finances and in the drug trafficking. So that's what I'm going to focus a little bit on. If you look at how Argentina has evolved in the last just really year, maybe less than a year, when President Kirchner has decided that her fate lies with the Bolivarian revolution and not elsewhere, as she's pursued a series of really dramatically irrational economic policies, not driven so much by a coherent ideology as by a vision of herself as the second Evita Perón. And I just finished a paper which should be published this weekend, I hope, that looks at the groups surrounding her. And there's a really interesting group. It's called La Cámpora. They're a group of young people, mostly under 40 years old, brought together by Cristina's son, Máximo, who have this really, because I've read a lot of their writings, they publish a lot, really strange utopian vision, this sort of a mixture of Marxism, fascism, Peronism, and all of these different things that is what's driving the current economic policy in Argentina. So if you want to understand sort of why they've gone off the rails so dramatically, look to this group of people who are completely, essentially they live on a different planet. They don't believe that the law of economics apply to Argentina, and they're making their best case to prove it doesn't as the economy goes down the toilet. In that group of people, a lot of them come out of what were the Montonero movement, the guerrilla movement in the 1970s and 80s. Several of them are children of the disappeared from the military dictatorship, so they have a definite sort of trajectory in their own personal lives. And what they've decided, and this is what's driving, I think, the alliance with Iran that you see emerging in Argentina, they've decided that the United States is no longer welcome. They have this Falklands and Malvinas issue with Great Britain and a whole series of issues. They want to make Argentina part of the Bolivarian alliance, and they've moved very dramatically as they do that to this very strange and inexplicable, at this point, alliance with Iran. You know this as well as I do. In 1994, the Amia bombing, the biggest terrorist attack by Islamic radicals in the Hemisphere before 9/11. And Argentina had maintained a consistent policy of distance with Iran. They would walk out of the United Nations when the Iranian president spoke and all of these things. They suddenly negotiated, which became public in January of this year, this secret memorandum of understanding between Iran and Argentina. And the crux of that understanding is that they're going to throw out the legal
investigations that led to the Interpol red notices against 7 Iranian officials, including the current defense minister, Ahmed Vahidi. And in exchange, they're going to do a joint investigation essentially designed to prove that Iran was not involved, although there's overwhelming evidence that it was a joint Iran-Hezbollah operation that carried out those attacks. What does Iran get out of this? It's quite easy to see. The thing that hurts them most in the international community still is that 7 of their top leaders are wanted by Interpol. They theoretically can't travel. They do travel. Ahmed Vahidi went to Bolivia in 2011 to inaugurate a joint military academy. One of the things that John was talking about, the asymmetrical warfare, they actually have an academy in Guarnes and Santa Cruz, Bolivia, designed to teach this book as military doctrine to the Pan-American military officer corps that goes down there trained. And Vahidi, knowing that he was wanted by Interpol, knowing that he would not be arrested in Bolivia, actually went to the inauguration of that school in Guarnes precisely because the Iranians are putting $1.5 million into that infrastructure and beginning to teach their own military doctrine. And the stated goal, if you look on the website of the school, is to eradicate any last vestiges of U.S. military doctrine in the Western Hemisphere, in Latin America. So it's pretty clear. They're not very subtle about how they manifest what they want to do. But this dynamic with Iran and Venezuela, with Argentina and Venezuela, and Argentina and Iran is part of, I think, the new triangulation effect. I think that the Iranians have been aware that there are going to be significant problems as the Venezuelan system falls apart. They need another country. Bolivia doesn't provide the infrastructure they necessary. Ecuador doesn't have the bandwidth to do all that they need to do, and so they pushed heavily into Argentina, which does. And if you look at how Argentine trade with Iran has grown, it's grown by several 100% in the last several years. It's well over $1 billion now in bilateral trade. Most of it's legal. It's most of it, and it's a huge surplus for Iran. They export beef and wheat and all kinds of stuff, soy, to Iran, which Iran desperately needs. The question is, what does Iran get out of the relationship with what does Argentina get out of this new relationship? It's clear, like I said, what Iran gets. They will get ultimately some sort of legitimacy in their leadership by having the Ahmed bombing charges dropped. Every time the memorandum of understanding, when it was finally published, is an incredibly opaque and stupid document. It's completely incoherent. And every time there's been a divergence of opinion, the Argentinians said initially, all of the Iranian officials, according to the memorandum was saying, will be questioned by Argentine prosecutors. And Iran said, no, they're not. And Argentina said, oh, okay, sorry. And then it said, okay, certain other things. And Iran said, no, that's not right. And Argentina said, okay. And Argentina said, none of the Interpol notices will be dropped. And Iran said a few weeks ago, yes, they will be dropped. And you can be pretty sure that Iran's going to win that debate. So I think that if you look at the expansion efforts into a real economy with real banks doing interesting things, Argentina is the place to focus. And I just want to close by talking a little bit about Ecuador, because what makes Ecuador so attractive is that it's a dollarized economy. And I think we often overlook the value of that dollarized economy in the ability of Iran to move money through the international system. And one of the things that passed almost unnoticed, although there was some public reporting on it, was that in January of 2012, President Correa in Ecuador met with Ahmadinejad on a state visit, and we acquired the minutes of that meeting, which then Correa acknowledged were authentic, where President Correa essentially offers the Iranians an Ecuadorian bank to launder their money, Kofiak Bank. Ahmadinejad said, we need help with breaking sanctions. Correa said, well, I have this little bank, it's in state receivership here, why don't you use that bank? And then he appoints the president of the Central Bank of Ecuador to go to Iran to negotiate the use of Kofiak Bank for Iranian sanctions-busting purposes. And what was really interesting is that they did their first, and I've written a paper on this too, if you want to see it, it's all public source and out there and documented. But the first thing that the delegation of Ecuador did was go to Russia. Why did they go to Russia? Because Russia is the only country where Iranian banks still can have correspondent, not the only one, the few, where they can still have correspondent relationships. So they go to Russia, set up correspondent relationships between Kofiak Bank and the same bank where the Iranian banks are. Then they go to Iran to negotiate the sale of Kofiak Bank or the use of Kofiak Bank. And the minutes describe the meetings with 4 different sanctioned Iranian banks. They're fully aware that Iranian banks are under both UN and US and EU sanctions, all 3. And one of the banks says, well, this is great, we would like to use Kofed Bank, and how about if we have an encrypted system of communication so that we can talk back and forth to each other without the outside world knowing. We'll have an encrypted telex, and we'll keep the deciphering code in the Iranian embassy in Ecuador. That's not a normal banking relationship. It's not how you normally open correspondent relations unless you want something to hide. So I think in the focus on the future of the revolution is going to be, of the Iran relationship and the Bolivarian revolution, is going to be a great deal outside of Venezuela as well. I think they're well aware of the chaos that's going to be coming into Venezuela. As either Maduro radicalizes, weakens, he won't be able to keep the factions together, all of those things. And they had already moved considerable amount of their economic infrastructure to Ecuador. Not the bulk of it, but they've been shifting out. Correa has made it known in meetings in Cuba when they've all been together there, that he views himself as the Bolivarian successor to Chavez. He wants to become, he knows he was smarter than Chavez, he knows that Evo Morales can't do it, he knows Maduro is going to be weak, and he views himself as a natural successor. So I think Ecuador's role will grow substantially, and I think Argentina is the sort of new element that will keep the process alive in ways that we otherwise would not have predicted had it been a closed system would end. I'll leave it there.
Douglas, thank you. That's superb.
Good afternoon. Well, good morning still. Nancy and Frank, thank you very much for the invitation to participate and to speak and to address a very distinguished group of folks that have gathered today. I'd like to thank you as well as members of your team, Frank, Ben and Anita and others, for doing all that you do to keep us safe here at home. And I mean that with all sincerity, because groups like yours keep the hot topics at the forefront, and that's what we absolutely have to do, and we have to do more of. Some have mentioned Congressman Jeff Duncan and the outstanding job that he's done in a pretty short time. But I cannot think of another member of Congress, quite frankly, that has pushed the topic to the forefront that I'm going to focus on, and that's Hezbollah, their growing involvement in the global drug trade, and what all that means to us here at home, and the threat that poses to us at home. I always try to come up with a title of a presentation that kind of will capture my comments, and mine was Hezbollah, Iran's most important proxy, Venezuela's most important terrorist and criminal partner. And thanks to the previous panel members, they added a couple of other aspects or dimension to that are critically important. They added the importance of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, to that, and obviously there's been a lot of talk of Iran. We have to look at all four of these not as singular, distinct, individual, disparate, if you will, threats. We have to look at them collectively as a collective threat. Individually, I don't think any of them pose really a tremendous threat to us at this point in time. But collectively, they really are an awesome and extraordinary threat. Most of my comments are going to be from the 30,000-foot level, and I'll come down to the treetops occasionally just to drive a few points home. But it's important to understand a couple things right up front. Of the 50 terrorist organizations that our country's identified and formally designated as foreign terrorist organizations, group that pose a threat to our nation and our way of life, as well as other freedom-loving nations around the world, well over half of those 50 are now involved in one or more aspects of the drug trade. And that's a topic that I could talk about all day long. But that poses some very, very unique and related kind of threats that I think you'll be able to kind of parse out of what I'm saying as I move through this. It's important also to understand that I'm not just talking about the Western Hemisphere's usual suspects. I'm not just talking about the FARC, Sendero Luminoso, and some of the others that have come and gone over the past many decades. But I'm also talking about groups like Hezbollah, more and more Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and others that are involved now in one or more aspects of the global drug trade. And I can't remember which one of the panelists initially said, it is money that keeps these groups alive. They have to keep their movements alive. And quite frankly, we've done yeoman's work at prosecuting our global war on terror. State sponsorship for terrorism is on the decline. If you don't subscribe to that, I think you would agree that we've shoved it much deeper underground, which causes it to cost a great deal more to do business and to support a terrorist group. And we've also done yeoman's work at identifying very powerful, powerful private funding streams that pump money into the war chests of terrorist organizations that are hell-bent on destroying our way of life. We have significantly disrupted those funding streams as well. So more and more of these groups have to turn to the global drug trade and to other types of transnational criminal activity to fund their operations. But let's talk about Hezbollah for just a minute. Just 10 short years ago, the Hezbollah was not heavily involved in the global cocaine trade. They were moving small amounts of cocaine, 10, 15 kilogram quantities from out of the tri-border area, albeit on a daily basis, certainly weekly basis, into other parts of the world where they could sell it and make enormous profits. But if you flash forward today, they're moving multi-ton quantities now into or out of the Andean region into Venezuela, across the Atlantic, into West Africa, into North Africa, onward to Europe, where the skyrocketing demand for cocaine and some other emerging markets in that part of the world have absolutely resulted in Hezbollah's meteoric rise in the global cocaine trade. And that has introduced them to new, extremely important strategic partners like the FARC, like the Mexican drug trafficking cartels, indigenous organized crime in the western part of Africa, terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and others, and again, just adds to this this very, very nasty milieu. I describe this really as the kind of potpourri of global organized crime, but it is very much all coming together. One country, more than any others, facilitates and enables this activity, and that country is Venezuela. It has become really the axis, the point of departure for the vast majority of cocaine that is now headed up the old Caribbean route and across the Atlantic into Europe, where the Hezbollah is reaping not tens of millions of dollars a year, folks, in profits, but hundreds of millions of dollars a year in profit. And I'll go into more detail on that in just a minute. So what's the confluence of Hezbollah, Iran, the FARC, and Venezuela? What does it mean for the safety and security of our country and other places around the world? I'll get into that more in just a minute, but I think most of it would say, well, we're not really sure. I mean, nobody is really sure what it means. But I can tell you what I do know. I'm a practitioner, folks. After 35 years in this business, it ain't good. It's not good. And we'll drill into that with a couple of other comments here. Ahmadinejad, I don't think anybody's mentioned this. Hopefully most of you know it, but and Iran, Ahmadinejad and Iran have opened 6 additional embassies in Latin America in just the past 5 or 6 years. They now have 11 in the countries of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Cuba, Ecuador, Mexico, Nicaragua, Uruguay, and Venezuela. And I believe in the not too distant, well, I'm sorry, they have established one in Ecuador. Not surprising to this growth, we're seeing an exponential growth in the presence of the Quds Force, the Special Forces arm of the IRGC that is responsible for clandestine operations abroad, including assassinations. And we'll touch more on that in just a minute. This illicit threat, and that's what it is, it's an illicit threat, has been, thanks to criminality, thanks to terrorism, it's been evolving for many, many years. It didn't just start yesterday. And like any other asymmetric threat, once the fire starts and we allow the flames to grow and they're spread by the wind, it becomes a threat that almost cannot be extinguished. It's almost impossible to totally extinguish it. And I'd like to also say and add to what some others have said, because I honestly believe that because Hugo Chavez is no longer with us, not much is going to change with respect to Venezuela. And the reason I say that is because the 14 years worth of filth and nastiness that are contained in books like this have been institutionalized within the political and the security infrastructure of that country. And the politicians at the very highest levels and security leaders at the very highest levels are now getting even fatter and more filthy rich by the day. I go back to, it's all about the money. There's way too much in stake for them now to give it up. I've just been told the hook's coming out, so let me wrap this up as quickly as I can. This isn't just Mike Braun talking, not a former senior guy from DEA. Robert Mueller, the head of the FBI, Mike Chertoff, when he was the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, all testified, or both testified before Congress, that we need to stay focused on Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a real threat. But the real threat, okay, the real threat is Hezbollah. They have an organizational and an operational sophistication or level of sophistication that Al-Qaeda could only hope to have. They have established a global footprint. Now, let me sum it up by this, my last comment, Frank. As tensions continue to heat up between our country and Iran and Israel, we have to be thinking about some things. Suppose I should say when, based on what we're reading in the paper with the final development of bunker busting bombs that can finally hit Iran's nuclear production capacity, when we hit them, what is Iran's response going to be? How are they going to strike back at us? The answer, there is really only one answer. They will strike back at us through Hezbollah and the Quds Force. Congressman King, his comments, not mine, at a hearing that I testified before his Committee on Homeland Security back in March of last year. His comments, he's been briefed by high-level government officials that there are at least 200 Hezbollah operatives that are operating on American soil today. Listen, folks, it's not if they can hit us, it's when they can hit us and what kind of damage they can do. I can promise you this, that they have got the ability to make what we witnessed, the bad as well as the good, in Boston just a few short weeks ago, look like child's play. And I don't want to diminish what happened, but they've got the ability to make that look like child's play. We can't let this happen. Thanks.
Mike, thank you very much.
And, I had to scratch my head thinking, putting myself in the positions of the State Department in the past about President Obama's visit to Mexico and Central America, because he went to Mexico at a time when Peña Nieto is declaring fairly brazenly in the U.S. media that he's going to change their approach to fighting the drug problem in their country, to quell violence on the street with a different strategy. A lot of us remember the truces that his party made at various levels with the narco traffickers. And that is something that is just completely unacceptable in this new era, where we have criminalized in ways, in different ways, and and holding governments more accountable than ever in terms of their complicity with narco-trafficking and narco-terrorist organizations. So the president says, let's pivot to the economy. God help Mexico when he gets involved in that, President Obama. But it's impossible to do that. And it suggests to me the chilling reality that he doesn't understand what we're confronting in this hemisphere, which is a narco-terrorist phenomenon, which has metastasized in this hemisphere, fueling bloody conflict in Central America and Mexico, and drug consumption and crime in the United States. Because the so-called drug war can be traced back many decades, most have failed to recognize the dangerous new role being played by a narco-state in Venezuela today. Venezuelan government officials have close operational ties with Colombian narco-traffickers and guerrillas, Mexican cocaine kingpins, Central American operatives, politicians, and Hezbollah terrorists that form a criminal network that sows lawlessness and bloodshed and mayhem in many of these countries, including the United States. Moreover, Venezuela's foreign policy has made alliances with individuals in these countries and movements who abuse the electoral process to take office and decimate the rule of law and democratic institutions, and also in their cooperation with us in fighting the narco threat. This happened in Honduras. All of the fuss that Chavez's interest in 2009 in Zelaya's return to power was about keeping a link in the drug chain in place. And now Zelaya's wife, Sarimara, is running for president of Honduras and backed by these same narco-terrorist elements. The same may be happening in El Salvador. You have to ask yourself, are the stories about Peña Nieto's involvement in narco-trafficking true? And is that happening on a grand scale right on our border in Mexico? Some may assess this cooperation between the narcos and terrorists as a mere marriage of convenience between different criminal elements, or just the modus operandi of powerful international drug syndicates finding another way of doing business. Instead, I think this criminal activity is part of a conscious strategy of these countries, led by Venezuela, to wage asymmetrical warfare against U.S. interests and allies in our security as well. It also works to undermine the democratic institutions and overwhelm law enforcement in order to accommodate criminal activities. Making matters worse, as Venezuela's de facto government wrestles with the crisis of illegitimacy and insolvency, its complicity with lucrative criminal organizations and criminal enterprises will only grow. This criminal political threat requires a much more robust analysis and coordinated response, from exposing Venezuela's support for Colombian and Islamic terrorist groups, identifying narco-terrorist activities in Central America and Mexico, imposing sanctions against entities, including state-run entities that are being used to aid and abet criminal transactions, dismantling transnational money laundering schemes, exposing politicians who work in the service of criminals, and bolstering the capability of responsible democratic governments to confront this threat. Unless the U.S. government begins to understand and to speak clearly and take seriously the threat emanating from Venezuela's criminal regime, it cannot mobilize an effective response among our partners. And until the United States does our part, governments will continue to tolerate lawlessness on the part of Venezuela. They could make truces with criminals in order to quell violence in their territory, and will grow ever more vulnerable to the narco-terrorist threat that aims to attack us in our neighborhood. My colleague Martin Rodil referred to the leadership of the Venezuelan government, their involvement, their complicity in narco-trafficking. From the current head of the National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, who was the capo de tutti capi, according to the Supreme Court justice who defected to the United States about a year ago, and he named 60 military officers that are involved in narco-trafficking. This is a guy, Eladio Ponte, who's a good friend of Martin's. Senior Chavista officials engage routinely in lucrative schemes involving Hezbollah front companies, Colombian terrorist groups, narco-traffickers, Venezuelan financial institutions, and even in PDVSA, which I say is an oil company that really is a drug trafficking organization that produces some oil on the side. Their production is down 40% since Chavez took office, but they seem to have the same amount of money as they always have. This is extraordinarily dangerous. These politicians and active duty retired military officers transport tons of cocaine into Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, the United States, and West Africa and Europe, as Mr. Braun has explained. One senior official in the State Department in private refers to this as an explosion of cocaine from Venezuela. Very conservative estimates in their reports say that it's at least doubled, but I think it's much, much greater than that. Every day, 10 or 12 or 15 King Airs leave Apure State on their way to Honduras. Every day. And they believe that the airborne traffic is only 20% of all the cocaine just going into Honduras. So extraordinary amounts of money involved, generated for their political activities. And Manuel Zelaya, the former president, whose restoration to power after he was removed from power constitutionally by the Honduran institutions, the restoration of power was advocated by the United States, and they knew at the time that he was involved in narco-trafficking, for no other reason that I told them. And I heard it from internally, from their sources. They had 3 people left the embassy of Honduras, our embassy in Honduras, in the years prior to Zelaya's ouster, because they could not stomach the fact that our embassy was turning a blind eye to drug trafficking by Manuel Zelaya. And that's the guy that we advocated in our foreign policy to restore to power after he was ousted. There's a little known fact that the world's most powerful cocaine smuggler and head of the Sinaloa cartel, Joaquin Chapo Guzman, spent the better part of the year 2010 in Venezuela, running his operations from outside Caracas and Margarita Island. And now we have an idea that he's left the country over a year ago. But we knew, and U.S. officials knew at the time, that he was there. In the Americas, how does Hezbollah figure into this? In the Americas, Hezbollah relies on a complicity with the Venezuelan state and partnerships with oil-financed Mexican and Colombian narco-traffickers and guerrilla groups that have in place the sophisticated smuggling and money laundering activities in the region. So they've tapped into that pre-existing network. That's how they've managed to move so far, so fast in about 5 years. They use these ties as a way of raising money, laundering funds, sharing tactics, training sleeper cells, and reaching out and touching U.S. territory, as Martinez alluded. This plot to blow up a restaurant in the heart of our nation's capital, everybody talks this a plot to murder the Saudi ambassador. Quite frankly, I don't care about the Saudi ambassador. They were going to blow up a restaurant in Washington, D.C. That was detected by DEA folks. And when they got that information, why? Because Hezbollah had reached out to somebody they thought was a Mexican narco-trafficker to carry out the bombing. The DEA folks went from office to office, laughed out of the offices because there were so many people who can't think outside the box and would think that Hezbollah would have had the audacity to do this, until they got a wire transfer from the IRGC operative who they know killed dozens of Americans in bombings and started to take it seriously. So thank God these people are capable of thinking outside the box. I'll refer you to, it's on the web, a network, a money laundering network run by a man, Ayman Juma. U.S. law enforcement has detected that, has frozen money, has frozen assets of his various operatives. But that was an international network that linked Mexican Colombian drug smugglers using entities in various countries, including Venezuela and others, to launder hundreds of millions of dollars a month until it was detected. So this is a profound threat. President Obama told a Miami journalist in July 2012, "My sense is that what Mr. Chavez has done over the last several years has not had a serious national security impact on the United States." This shows a really startling failure to comprehend the grave and growing threat that they pose, not only to our security, but to the security and the political stability of the Western Hemisphere, of Latin America. So I do pay tribute to the fact that the Congress is paying a lot of attention, and to Congressman Duncan and to Chairman Mike McCall, and I hope Congressman Salmon will take this up as the chairman of the subcommittee. Let me just make very quickly, I'll wrap this up very quickly, recommendations. We shouldn't, knowing all we know about these things, we shouldn't legitimize the Maduro regime, which stole an election on April 14th. So the president has managed not to say those things. But you saw a statement yesterday from the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, Roberta Jacobson, referring to, quote, the 49% of people who voted for Capriles. She has no idea that 49% voted for Capriles. There's never been a recount. The President of the United States doesn't even recognize the results. And that is a signal to Maduro that, don't worry, the career diplomats are going to sort this out for you, and they're going to normalize relationships with a narco state. That has to, at the very least, be on the table. You know, the drug trafficking involvement. They've got to, you know, we're already hearing signals that they're ready to give up some narco generals. You know, and just name a name, and we'll throw one over the fence to you. Well, you know, send Diosdado Cabello for starters, the president of the National Assembly. That'd be great. But it reminds me a little bit of the guy that writes the IRS and said, I cheated on my taxes 5 years ago, and I've been able to sleep since. Here's $100,000. If I still can't sleep, I'll send you the rest. But so this is, you know, a real threat, and I do understand that the DEA and OFAC and others, these folks have worked assiduously on this. But where are the indictments from Eric Holder's Justice Department? We know there are some sealed indictments. Why aren't they unsealed? And there are various reasons, but there should be indictments against these principals of the Venezuelan government. There should be sanctions, at the very least, against PDVSA or these various entities or operatives of PDVSA who carry out this parallel commercial business. And we have the names, and we've given the names to OFAC, along with correspondence that points out this criminal activity. So we need to press for those indictments. We need more intelligence capability in this hemisphere. General Kelly, who's the new commander at Southcom, said very clearly in his posture statement, we do not have the resources to collect against this problem. And he spoke more specifically about this threat than his two previous predecessors have. We need to cooperate with our allies in Latin America, Canada, and Europe, have a good dialogue with intelligence on law enforcement and armed forces organizations so they understand this threat. So to conclude, this narco-terrorism on our doorstep, perpetrated by Mexican and South American narco-traffickers, Colombian terrorist guerrillas, and Hezbollah with Iranian and Venezuelan complicity, demands a response from those whose job it is to keep us safe. Our government has to take these measures unilaterally and or with willing partners to disrupt, to dismantle these illicit operations and neutralize these unacceptable threats. That's the very least that we can expect of our government. Thank you very much.
But about the case about the hiring of the Mexican DTO to do the bombing in Washington, D.C., there's plenty of Hezbollah running around the U.S. I mean, you know, we know that from other investigations in tobacco. Why not use one of them? Why use the Mexicans? Is it plausible deniability? And if you're doing plausible deniability, then where's the terror? I mean, isn't the fun of terrorism. That's
Yeah.
strategic communications of fear me lots.
Sure.
And then if you have plausible deniability, you kind of lose that. The other question was for Roger. I have a theory that there are different factions in I'm Venezuelan, by the way, born in Venezuela, in America. And I have a question about, I think that there are different factions in the Venezuelan government. Some are more ideological and view the drugs thing as a great way to fund that. And some people are just having lots of fun, making lots of money. Hezbollah is thrilled because they're just, it's sort of plane loads of drugs rather than just big plane loads rather than little ones. So given that you have different factions with slightly different motivations, how will that fracture as the PSUV fractures?
Thank you. Michael?
Well, first of all, great question or questions with respect to, why not claim credit yourselves and use Hezbollah operatives? I mean, it has everything to do with deniability, and that's Hezbollah are masters at just that. And why? I mean, they don't want to commit suicide, for God's sakes, in the act. They know, and can certainly understand what our response would be. So if you can blame it on a member of the ultra-violent Los Zetas or someone else, then by all means do it, carry it out, let someone else take credit for it, or blame it on someone else, protect yourself as best you can. But that example, I think more than anything else, speaks to the importance of Hezbollah and the Quds Force. Quds Force was right in the middle of that as well. It's important to understand something else too, is where you find Hezbollah, you will always find the Quds Force. They built it, they developed it, they built it, they continue to kind of manage and direct much of their activities globally. But the Hezbollah, think of it this way.
Clarification, Quds built Hezbollah.
Quds built Hezbollah, okay? Designed it, built it, and again, continue to often, in many ways, manage and control it and direct its daily activities around the globe. But that example, I can't think of a better example of that one that speaks to what Hezbollah really is. Hezbollah is Iran's fleet of aircraft carriers. They are the weapons delivery system for Iran. Iran's got the ability to strike us at home and any of our interests anywhere in the world through its fleet of aircraft carriers, the Hezbollah, managed and directed by the Quds Force.
Roger?
I think you can identify these factions really, as you alluded to, knowingly, with that rivalry within the PSUV, the ruling party, between Diosdado Cabello and Nicolás Maduro. Diosdado is a guy who's military and is thought to have the confidence of folks in the military who think like him. He sat on all the promotion boards for most of these general officers and others. And he's not considered ideological, as ideological, and he's actually hostile to Cuba. But he's up to his eyeballs in narco-trafficking. So, and vis-a-vis Maduro, who's this ideologue, and is a puppet of the Cubans, really, and he's doing their bidding. Maduro is much more likely to continue the money going to Cuba, for example. That's why the Cubans insisted that he take power. Diosdado, on the other hand, I have heard rumors that he said, we'll shove the Cubans out. I'll push the Cubans out if we can make some kind of arrangement. And what went through my head was, well, you're not doing us any favors shoving the Cubans out, shove the Iranians and Hezbollah out, and then we'll talk. But so he would do that, and there are going to be people in that regime, corruption, astronomical levels of corruption, even by Latin American standards, who are going to want to cash in their chips and go live in their villas that they've built in Milan and Madrid and other places. And there will be some of that, and they don't want to give that money to Bolivia and Nicaragua because we're spending our inheritance, right? And so there will be that natural tension between those who want to continue the sort of ideological foreign policy, which is altogether provocative, and those who say, look, it's not personal, it's business, and let's do business. And that's going to really break them apart. I mean, there's a lot of sort of negative energy within the ruling party, and that's without dealing with a disintegrating economy, a criminal situation that's absolutely out of control, and all of the other things that Chavismo has wrought in that country.
Do you guys have time for one more question? Sure. Past our appointed hour. Erin?
Thank you very much. As some of you know, I monitor the activity.
Could you introduce yourself, though I said your
Sorry,
first
I'm
name?
Erin Anderson, and I monitor the activity between Mexico and the U.S. border. So your comments were extraordinarily relevant. We're seeing it up close and personal. And I'm also monitoring the comprehensive immigration bill that's been, in the Senate. I'm alarmed that neither of you were able to testify in the Senate on this bill, and I'd like to ask for both of your comments on how the Senate Immigration Comprehensive Bill, what will be the ramifications given what you've seen and observed and talked about, and this amnesty bill?
Well, I mean, listen, my comment is this. Really, I don't care how tough we crack down on immigration, and I think the ambassador would agree with me. He's seen the same thing in many other border locations. I don't care how hard you crack down, no matter what legislation you come up with. Highly sophisticated organizations like Mexican drug trafficking organizations, and by the way, folks, they didn't just get their start 10 or 12 years ago. They've been in the business for the better part of 7 decades. They will they will find their way around, under, over, or through any blockade that you put up. They are the most cagey, intuitive individuals that you will ever find. What I would also say to that is, and that's why groups like Hezbollah and Quds Force find them critically important, and they're doing everything that they possibly can to build rock-solid, enduring relations with these groups, because they understand the strategic importance of that border and the fact that the Mexican cartels now dominate drug trafficking in over 500 cities throughout the United States. That's extremely important to them. There are the rat lines and the cache sites and the safe houses. They're already in place, and they can exploit it and leverage it for all that it's worth, simply through developing solid, enduring relations. And there is no criminal/terrorist group in the world that I know of that is better than that at doing that than Hezbollah.
Well, after we spoke, by the way, I authored a piece that was published in one of these Hill newspapers saying that comprehensive immigration reform should include a foreign policy component, which is our helping, not with tons of aid, but helping generate private sector activity in these countries so you can generate jobs, and that there should be conscious effort in doing that. And also on that we also ought to include our security assistance to these countries. We have to do more. We talk about Mexico's drug war. It's not Mexico's drug war. It's our drug war. Mexico's fighting it, or they were until last week. And that's going to become a problem for us. So I think we need to do more on that security, that foreign part of this immigration issue. I believe we have to deal with the immigration population here, folks that are here illegally, in some responsible way. And it's going to be a very complicated legislative process, and I hope that we can produce something meaningful that, because I come at this, as you might imagine, from the national security perspective, including, therefore, securing the border as much as we possibly can to sort of honest commerce and honest crossings. And we can't do that with, the equivalent of an immigration system where the stoplight, it's there, but none of the lights are on, and not even a yellow one, or a green one. We have to have an immigration system that accommodates our labor force requirements, whatever they may be, and people who come here and contribute to our economy, because we are a nation of immigrants and have always contributed to our economy. People who come here and have a disproportionate number of small businesses that immigrants, start and create jobs and all those sorts of things. So I think from a lot of different standpoints, we need to have some kind of a comprehensive bill. But that what a lot of folks skeptics are insisting upon is border security, and I am 100% on board with that too.
Well, that's a perfect spot on which to break. I think we've both covered handsomely the really quite challenging situation south of the border. And the need to secure it is, of course, just one of the things that must be attended to. And I think we've provided, through the wonderful inputs of these various experts, some very good suggestions as to what else we need to be doing to maximize what the chairman said earlier were the opportunities and to minimize the dangers. I appreciate very much all of our speakers being with us, and for you being here as well. We'll look forward to the fourth annual Latin American Security Symposium in about a year's time. And in the meantime, I commend you the terrific work that the Menges Hemispheric Security Project is doing, and of course the great counsel and inputs of these folks. We'll talk with you again very soon, I hope. Thank you very much for being here.